Macmillan Audio presents The Hungry Brain by Stephan J. Guyenet, Ph.D. Read for you by Aaron Abano.
Introduction. In 1980, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services and the U.S. Department of Agriculture released a document titled Dietary Guidelines for Americans. The guidelines were intended to reduce the risk of obesity and chronic disease by offering simple, evidence-based dietary recommendations for American policymakers, health professionals, and the general public. The document was only 20 pages long and focused on the following 7 goals. 1. Eat a variety of foods. 2. Maintain ideal weight. 3. Avoid too much fat, saturated fat, and cholesterol. 4. Eat foods with adequate starch and fiber. 5. Avoid too much sugar. 6. Avoid too much sodium. 7. If you drink alcohol, do so in moderation. If you followed the guidelines faithfully, you would end up eating a diet that's not very different from what most nutrition professionals recommend today. Primarily whole grains, beans, potatoes, vegetables, fruits, nuts, lean meat, seafood, and dairy, with little added fat, sugar, or highly processed foods. In the section titled Maintain Ideal Weight, the guidelines explain that changes in body fatness are determined by the number of calories you eat minus the number you burn, and it lays out its 4-point weight management strategy. Increase physical activity, eat less fat and fatty foods, eat less sugar and sweets, avoid too much alcohol. Seems pretty reasonable. Yet you know what happened next? We got fatter. Between 1980 and today, the U.S. obesity rate more than doubled. Certain diet contrarians have seized on this correlation, suggesting that the guidelines themselves made us fat by recommending that we replace dietary fat with carbohydrate, leading us to eat too much refined starch and sugar. Yet the evidence has never supported such speculation, in part because Americans who actually follow these recommendations tend to be leaner than Americans who don't. Not to mention the fact that the guidelines specifically emphasize limiting sugar and other refined foods. 2 additional lines of evidence undermine the idea. First, our absolute intake of fat didn't actually decline, according to USDA and CDC data. It only declined on a percentage basis because we began eating more carbohydrate. Depending on which data set you cite, our absolute fat intake either increased, USDA, or remained approximately the same, CDC. Second, the USDA has been publishing dietary guidelines in one form or another since 1894, and the 1980 version wasn't the first one to recommend limiting fat intake. The guidelines may not have been flawless, but that's not why they failed to constrain our expanding waistlines. The reason they failed is that we simply didn't listen. We didn't listen in 1980, and we have largely ignored the advice from the updated versions that have appeared every 5 years, despite the fact that they are now widely taught in public schools. It's not that we didn't change at all. We did start drinking less whole milk, replacing it with low-fat and skim milk, for better or worse. My colleagues Mario Kratz and Ton Bars and I published a paper in 2013 that reviewed studies on the association between full-fat dairy intake and obesity, metabolic health, and cardiovascular disease. As far as I know, we were the first to do so. As it turns out, people who drink whole milk tend to be leaner and metabolically healthier than those who don't, and the 2 groups also have about the same cardiovascular risk. I think it's too early to know exactly what the findings mean, but they certainly raise questions about why nutrition professionals recommend reduced fat dairy. And we replaced some of our beef intake with chicken, which is lower in saturated fat, but we were extremely selective about what we implemented. Against the advice of the guidelines, our intake of soda, refined sugar, refined starch, added fats, and highly processed food skyrocketed, along with our calorie intake. I doubt these negative changes had much to do with the
Sample complete. Ready to continue?